Welcome, everybody, to the R.O.A.R podcast show. John Smith here with John Rattan, and we have a special guest today. We got city councilman and professor at Hillsdale College, or ex-professor at Hillsdale College, William Morrisey. And we're going to go ahead and, because Will is, since he's a council member, he has to give a disclaimer, and we're going to go ahead and do it right from the beginning here. Just go ahead, Will, and go ahead and give your disclaimer.
That's right. I have to say that the opinions I express on this show are my own. They don't represent the official positions of the city of Hillsdale. And if anybody wants to know what the positions of the city of Hillsdale are, they can just go to the website and read the charter, which is basically the constitution of the town, the constitutional law of the town, or the ordinances, or in the case of the resolutions we pass, they're in the minutes, which are all on the website.
Okay, so just go ahead and say hi to everybody, Will.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming. We're just going to jump right to our topics here, and I gave Will some bullet point topics to go over before he came onto the show, so I didn't want to surprise him with anything. We have been discussing a few things here for the last 30, 40 minutes here, but...
well, because you can't not discuss politics in my house.
Well, Will, I've been kind of like just digressing in my brain about the word duty. I became more spiritual recently, and I expressed this on the show a couple times, and I was listening to my pastor talk, or actually a guest pastor that came into the church, and he was talking about people that get sort of tired about going to church. Like sometimes you get in like a road where you feel sluggish and you don't want to go to church.
Rut.
Yeah, like a rut. You know, you get kind of lazy or lethargic, and you just don't feel like doing things, and sometimes you skip out on church. Well, he was talking about the idea of sometimes you get in those ruts, and then you kind of get out of that rut, and then you're like, well, I have to go to church, and then it gets to, so that you got one level where you like don't go, and you got one level where I have to go, and then you got another level where you want to go, and then there's like additional levels. Well, essentially it gets down to where he was saying that it's their duty to go to church. And so he feels like this pastor was saying, you get to the level where you feel like it's your duty. I was kind of putting that in perspective because I talk more about politics than I do religion. And I was like, man, what you know, and I was telling people about my podcast. I'm like, man, this is my duty to promote the Constitution, to talk about politics, to expose corruption. And so
to hold elected officials
so like
to their oath.
Well, in your opinion, or what's the duty of a citizen? Because you're a citizen before you're a politician.
That's right.
And so, like, what's the duty of a citizen, and what does that duty really mean? What does duty mean in your opinion?
Duty it flows from rights. It's the opposite side of the same coin. If I have a right to something, and it's a natural right, it's an inborn right, it's not something that was just given to me by somebody, then I have the right to demand that other people are respecting that right. At the same time, if it's a natural right, it's inherent in everyone, then I have to respect that right in others. I have the duty to respect that right in other people. I have an obligation to do so, because if I'm not respecting their rights, why would they respect mine?
I used to talk about that in one of my classes. You know, we're governed by consent, and rights are really the same way. I only have the rights I have because I consent for you to have the same. There's a responsibility there for me to make sure.
So you have the civil rights via consent, but the natural rights, the unalienable rights that are
given by the Creator,
by the laws of nature and of nature's God. That's a different story.
Sure,
they're yours. They're unalienable. They're not absolute, but they are unalienable, and they are inherent. So, for example, I'll give you an example of what happens when these rights are not respected. Somewhere around the 9/11 attacks, there was a video on YouTube that was distributed by one of the Islamist organizations. And in that video, they had a 4-year-old girl who had obviously been catechized according to the radical ideology of these folks. And they asked her, "What are Jews? What are Jews?" And she says, "Jews are apes and pigs." Now, that means that Jews are subhuman. That means Jews have no unalienable rights.
Correct.
They're not. They're subhuman. And if that's the case, then you can kill them.
Right.
Just kill them off. And that's exactly, of course, what they want people to think in those.
That's the justification.
Yeah,
the
and that's the justification. You're not human. So the laws of nature and of nature's God establish creatures, right? Human beings, horses, trees, all sorts of things that have a nature by which they flourish or do not flourish. Life is one thing that is absolutely indispensable for the flourishing of any creature. Liberty for a human being, right? Pursuit of happiness for a human being. These are all inherent, unalienable rights, and consent comes in. Consent comes in when you then establish a civil society where the laws are derived from those natural rights. And sometimes people make the mistake of assuming that consent just means going along with something.
Yeah.
No. In the Declaration of Independence, it says governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. But the definition of their just powers is what? To secure your unalienable rights.
Yep. To life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
It's right in the Declaration.
And that's because you got dual duty. You got a duty as a citizen, but you also got a duty as a council member, right?
Right.
So like at least from the council member standpoint, your number one job is to protect those civil liberties, is what you're saying.
Well, that's a little bit of a question I'd like to bring up, and that is, when you are part of the government, do you have certain rights? And let me preface that with, I was watching one the other day in which a police officer walked up to somebody that was videotaping in public and said, you got your ID? And they said, well, why do you want my ID? Well, I have a right to pull your ID. There's that. I believe that's a little bit of a misconception. When you're part of the government, you might have a duty to do, or a responsibility to do certain things. But the government itself, or an agent of the government, has no right with the government. They only have what is delegated to them. They only have the power that is delegated to them.
The people have natural rights. The people delegate their powers to elected officials and to some extent unelected officials like Supreme Court justices and so on, who are appointed by elected officials.
But part of the government.
And that's where rights come from. It comes from the laws of nature, of nature's God first. Then the rights exist unalienably in the so to speak, the DNA of every human being. Then human beings form civil societies. If they're properly formed, they are intended to secure those rights, to effect the safety and happiness of the people who are in that social compact, if you will. And in that case, the people that they elect swear by the constitutional the constitutional form to help secure those rights for the citizens.
Right. I guess what I'm getting at is I have a problem when I hear people that are part of government say, well, I have a right to do this as the government, because they don't have a right to do it as the government. They may have a duty or responsibility to do that in their official capacity, but as part of the government, they are no longer flesh, and we have a hard time because we go, okay, well, the sheriff is a flesh and blood human being. Does he have those rights? He does when he's the flesh and blood human being, but when he is representing the government, when he is the government, then he has no longer rights, but duties and obligations because of that consent.
Yeah, you've basically been separated out from the ordinary citizen to perform the duties under the Constitution. So you do have powers.
Yes.
But you have delegated powers from the people. That's what you do have. When you're in the natural rights theory says, well, if you're in a state of nature, then you have the right to enforce your rights. But you give up some of those rights, right, in terms of supplying the government with a certain amount of revenues, et cetera, to make sure that your rights are actually secured in a more efficient way than they would ever have been if you were just out in the woods somewhere trying to defend yourself.
Sure, and I mean that's the John Burke Society talks about that a little bit.
We're almost looking at it like in terms of hierarchy here. When you have a natural right, you have a natural right to defend yourself. You have like these basic fundamental. You're protecting your own self. You're not necessarily protecting anybody else. But I'm not saying it doesn't pertain like this. So if a guy was going to kill my neighbor, that's different.
There you go.
what I'm saying is, like, we have these basic fundamental rights, but as a politician, now we start, because you're taking you got a dual role here, because you're a normal citizen, you got your natural rights, but you also got a politician standpoint, like what your duty as a politician. Your number one duty is to protect civil liberties. You're talking about we give consent to people like you for doing certain responsibilities. Right. Now, what I've noticed in our community, and we were talking about this earlier, is there's like no limit anymore when we're talking about love. Like because we gave the consent, now you have full authority to do as you will.
And that is a direct democracy idea.
Yeah, progressive idea.
A progressive idea of direct democracy, and we saw that on August 1st, 2016, when Tim Wahlberg was arguing with Chris Ann Hall, and his argument was by virtue of the fact that he was put there.
And they were talking about spending.
Yeah.
They were talking about spending.
That's right. And he was trying to say, no, the Senate has just as much in holding the purse strings as Congress. And she said, no, Congress
we know
has
that's not true.
Yeah.
No, the House of Representatives has the power, not the right, it's the power.
The power.
It's an enumerated power in the Constitution to originate these spending bills. But obviously it's a bicameral system of government, which means there are two houses, and both of them have to approve the budget.
But it says that the Senate may. It doesn't say that they shall.
Yeah, but
in the Constitution it says that the Senate may.
And if they say it may, you better believe they will.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
but when it comes down to it, they don't have to, because it comes down to the representatives.
The corruption stemming from your local level up to that level shows that the degree of corruption, right? Because
let's back up a little, because there are really 2 points on the table. One is democracy, and the other is progressivism. Mm-hmm. Now, democracy. The one aspect of how you can get your rights taken away from you is that if you make the same kind of argument that Stephen Douglas made in the 1858 U.S. Senate race against Abraham Lincoln. Douglas wanted people to be the people in the territories, which were not yet organized as states. He wanted them to be able to vote slavery up or down in those territories,
like a state's right.
Yes, as a right of a citizen. Mm-hmm. And what Lincoln said is, no, that's not a natural right. Slavery is against natural right. And so the majority, it doesn't matter if 99% of the people said my right to life or my right to liberty can be taken away. I don't care how many people say that or vote against me to allow that to happen. It's still an unalienable natural right of mine to have,
protected by the law.
And it's also protected under American law. Not all laws, right? There are plenty of places in the world where it's not protected at all. But under the American system, the original American constitutional system, the civil law backs up or secures the unalienable natural rights, which are very vulnerable if you didn't have.
It must be in pursuance thereof,
right,
is what Article 6 says.
Yeah.
So, and this is one of the things that I've talked about before, and I've taken a maximum amount of flack over, is that same concept, and that is we are a republic. Mm-hmm. And we've even had a tremendous amount of ex-presidents that give speeches. I saw one from Obama, one from Bush, one from Clinton, in which they all talk about the great democracy America.
Well, are spreading democracy in the Middle East.
Yeah,
that's straight up what they're doing.
How do we take something somewhere that we've never had that's despotic to begin with?
Getting back to the notion of republic versus democracy, let's lay that out.
We've already laid that on the show. For our
but
viewers.
It's still good.
Yeah. If folks want to read the classic statement of the distinction between democracy and a republic, read the 10th Federalist Paper by James Madison.
Yes.
Well, you're coming from the notion that people even know what the Federalist Papers are.
Well, I'll tell them what they are in case anybody.
We could keep taking it deeper and deeper, you know.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Now, when I say Federalist Papers, most people's eyes roll to the top of their head.
Yeah. So. Well, we can. let's not digress into that. We're
Okay.
going on what's the duty of the citizen,
Right.
and what does duty mean, and then you also like we're talking about government duties. And like for our audience here, I want them to understand that you have natural rights, you have inalienable rights, but what's the duty of the politician? The politician's number one duty is to protect civil liberties, to protect those inalienable rights. They a lot of times when you become a township supervisor in your local community, and let's be fair here and honest, 99 well. I'm generalizing here. Most people do not know what the Federalist Papers are. They don't even know what the Constitution are, or what the Constitution is.
Most haven't read the Constitution.
Yeah, or even if they did, it's not like they know how to put it into practical use.
Let's be fair. A lot of people have a warm and fuzzy idea of what they got when they were in school, a public school that was set up by John Dewey, an ardent socialist.
Yeah, but
so let's be fair about
from
that.
a public school from 10th grade, and I'm 39 right now, right? The thing that I remember from school is not anything in education. I remember like what I was doing in the hallways.
Right.
I remember picking up the girls.
Probably a lot of kids remember
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you were doing in the
Yeah,
hallway.
you know, like
being honest.
you know, we're not. I wouldn't be able to write a report. Like, let's be real. So when you become township supervisor, say at 55 years old in the community, and you're a good person, you just want to do goodwill on the people. They're not really going to be acting constitutional. So like when
they do with the best of intentions.
and I'm not going to
though.
name this township supervisor, but we were just there a couple days ago, and when I brought up the Constitution, he's like, "Oh, I'm sick of hearing that thing.
So
I'm
sick and
I'm
tired
so
of hearing
sick
that."
and tired of hearing about that."
Okay, but you took an oath.
And
to it.
when I asked him what form of government we are, with no trick, it's not a trick
Yeah.
question. What form of government we are? He wasn't able to tell me what form of government we are.
He went.
That's
Well,
a-
what kind do you think we are?
Yeah, well, that's I get that back all the time. Or sometimes I hear the word democracy.
Oh, yeah.
But I was surprised to hear that his partner in crime there was he told me republic. I think he's the first politician that actually told me this, that we're a republic. So I was actually
Well,
surprised.
the trustee did that.
The trustee.
Yeah,
and,
he was good about that.
And you know what? I think we might have some light in with the trustee, but as a duty as a politician, Will, is when you see this, like say you have your city board, right? And you see all the other members on the board and they're acting in a certain way. What is your duty as a politician to protect other people's civil liberties when you see them being violated?
If I see them being violated, my duty is to speak up about it.
Right. So let's give an example. If someone was someone in your community directly, so like if the sheriff is violating his civil liberties, as a politician, you're supposed to stand up for that citizen, right?
That would be, especially the county commissioners would be that, I would think.
Well, I agree with you. The
'cause-
county commissioners would have the first obligation.
Yeah.
But I think anyone that's elected would have an
Yeah,
obligation.
that'd be
Look, any citizen would.
Yeah.
well, yeah. So
Right?
Right.
I mean,
but the other
but
thing
you
is
have to. But the thing is, though, you have to be careful because you have to. You'd have to have
Sure.
evidence.
Sure.
You can't just go
Spout
on
out.
rumors.
Right,
Sure.
I often say that if no matter what the main industry in any small town is, the biggest industry of all is the gossip industry.
well,
Yeah.
you got that right.
And I'll tell you, there's some wild things that are said about people because
Well-
there are grudges going back for 50 years in the families.
but
and that
we've
kind of
we've
stuff.
already decided that there's some things you can say about people, and it's just political satire.
Oh, that's right.
But regardless, I guess what I'm saying is, yes, the citizens have a duty to say it. The difference is, and I see this all the time in law enforcement, I get people go, well, you already know who I am. Who are you? The difference is you've got all the force. You have
What my main responsibility would be, and any councilman, not just mayor, councilman, would be for the city police.
yes.
The city police, that would certainly be the case. In other words, you have to, you're sworn to do the job that you're elected to do, and you can't just sort of you'd step out of your role as a councilman and just
Absolutely.
be a citizen if you were talking about some other level of government. For example, I might have opinions about a congressman or a president of the
sure.
United States. Well, that's not my job as a councilman
Right,
to,
right.
to get involved with that.
No, is it your job as a councilman to do any type of investigation? If you see smoke, usually there's fire. So like when people bring you evidence or they start talking, maybe nothing's official. So, but they're like, say they have a real grievance, and they bring that real grievance to your table, and they're like, "Will, we need your help." Especially
Especially now I represent Ward 2.
Okay. Well, where is Ward 2, by the way?
Ward 2, there are 4 wards. There are 4 voting districts. They call them wards here in Hillsdale City. And each ward has 2 elected representatives, 2 councilmen. Plus there's a mayor who's voted on by all the citizens in the...
all 4 wards.
All the citizens are eligible to vote for the mayor.
It's
an at-large...
We get where you're going with that.
Yeah. And but at any rate, Ward 2 in Hillsdale consists. It goes from Bar Street on the west side of town over to the west side of Hillsdale Street, and it's the southern border is Fayette Street.
Oh, okay.
So that's basically it. And
what does that represent you, John? Like, do you?
No,
represent
I'm in
your-
the township.
Oh, gotcha.
I'm in the township.
Yeah.
I'm not in the city.
Yeah, you're not in the city.
Yeah.
So at any rate, that's where my ward is, and the other wards are located in different territories.
Okay, so if anybody has a grievance in your community, they can come to you
Yes.
and say, "Will, we need your help for this, whatever the grievance may be."
That's right.
No,
my email address is right there on the website.
Okay, yeah, we'll recap on the email address too.
Yeah.
But no, my thing is, and I understand you have an obligation because of where you're at and where your local power is. I guess what I'm getting at is I don't have anything to back this up. This is just my opinion. And that is, I think that when you're in an elected position, you have a certain amount of power, more so than just the average citizen in today's America. Maybe not in the way it was intended, but in today's America, those that are in elected positions have a little bit more power.
Yeah, because everybody has the idea of democracy.
That's right. So I see it as anybody that's in an elected position, if they see something that isn't right within other positions of government, very close to where they're at, I believe they have a moral obligation to say that's not right.
My view is
that's a tough one, isn't it?
That is tough.
I would say that the main thing that an elected official should do is to mind the business of the thing of the entity to which he was elected.
Sure.
So this it's really city government.
So as a citizen, maybe you would speak up.
Yeah,
for
that's right. But
set.
it's not. It wouldn't be my job as a city councilman to.
I see what you're
to
saying.
But let me bring
push my nose into somebody else. It would be like me commenting on something that was going on in some other town. Real in a way, I mean, or some other level of government. I could do it, but it wouldn't. It wouldn't really be the primary duty, in my opinion.
Let's look at this then. And I've always said when somebody's rights are being violated and someone doesn't stand up, it's just sooner or later it's going to be their turn. Mm-hmm. So when you see people's rights violated, you have to stand up, because when yours get violated, you want others to stand up. That's just kind of how it works.
And that's the way politics should be.
Yes.
That's the political process.
And so what I see is, as a council member of Ward 2 in the city, if we happen to see, the state police, or let's just use the state police, for example, or even, let's say, BATF, going around the outskirts of the city to people in Hillsdale County and violating their rights and doing certain things. If, as a city council member of Ward 2, you don't say something against that because of morals, sooner or later it's just going to be the turn of the people in your ward. And who's going to say anything then?
Yeah, that's the main thing would be to bring that to the attention of the state legislative representatives.
Right,
and,
but if they're not being beasted on and they don't do anything, what then?
Oh yeah, but again, this is what the political process is for. This is what the media are for.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that because a lot of people complain about people commenting on Facebook. Like in the Hillsdale Hot Debates, for an example, the narrative for the summertime was, well, that's negative. And I told when people say that, I made a comment one time back saying, well, that's a slap to the face to people that have real grievances.
Sure.
Because if you have a real grievance, the internet, what you just said, media, is the only place that's hearing it. Where else are you going to air your grievance? Mm-hmm. So that's a good spot.
And let me say a disclaimer here. scenario I used, because I get this all the time. Oh, Rutani's anti-law enforcement. No, I'm not. I was using that as an example. I'm not saying that happened or would.
Yeah,
I'm just using that as an example.
We violate the Constitution all the time, civil liberties all the time, not because they want to,
with
or maybe sometimes, but with the best intentions.
Most times it's not because they're bad people. They do it with the best of intentions.
Right.
And and what did Justice Scalia say? He said the Constitution was written in such ways to prevent us from our own best intentions.
well, we digressed a lot into this. We got about probably about 20 minutes into talking about what duty means. I don't know if we even rounded it out. I mean, do you think we rounded everything out here?
Well, I think that basically duty is the opposite side of the coin of rights, and that your duties consist of respecting the rights of others. It's an obligation that every human being has to every other human being.
So
that's the moral side of it.
I have
but
obligation to my neighbor like that.
Citizen obligation or duty to protect and defend the rights of myself, but also of other people in the civil society to which in which I am a member.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I see at that point in time, duties are kind of like responsibilities, because I always say with rights come with responsibilities. That's the back side of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't have a right without a responsibility connected to it.
What's the feeling of duty? The feeling of duty is beyond I have to, right? Did you guys agree with that?
Sure. Yes, I think that
it's a way of life.
Exactly. Well, what we mean by a political regime, right? When we talk about political regimes, we're talking about who rules. We're talking about the institutions by which they rule. We're talking about the purposes, such as protecting natural rights, but we're also talking about the way of life, of that political community. So, for example, I'll give you an example. My mother was born in 1912 in Cliffwood Beach, New Jersey. She was the daughter of Polish immigrants who came over at the age of 20 in 1900. Now, what if they'd stayed in Poland? My mother would have been
endured World War II.
Would have been in big trouble because the Nazis rolled in in the
Germans,
1930s.
Yeah.
Then the communists took over, and half of her life would have been under communism. She would have been a different kind of person. Mm-hmm. She would have had the same DNA. She would have had many of the same basic character traits, but her whole life expectancies, her habits of thought, and her habits of heart and mind, her habits of heart and mind would have been really very different if she had grown up in a different way of life, different kind of person. So that means that it's not just a matter of, I have to do this. It's a matter of your honor as a human being. Put it that way. It's a matter of your honor as a human being and as a citizen of a self-governing republic, a self-governing citizen in a self-governing republic.
Well,
and that's where genuine patriotism comes in. It's not because, sure, you love the land and you love the people and so on, but it's the honor of being in a self-governing republic.
And I'm going to just say it first and foremost that you're probably more intelligent than the average person. You're more intelligent than me for sure. And so
we'll see about that.
Yeah. So when you talk to are
you setting me up, ladies and gentlemen?
No, I've seen him put his shoes on. You are.
so
I'm just a farm boy.
Yeah. So when you're talking to generally speaking, I do a lot of general speaking, even though I know a lot of people don't like that. But representing the average person, a feeling for duty is kind of like when you're born in Michigan and you want to rah-rah for a sports team, right? Who do you rah-rah for football? Mm-hmm. And you rah-rah for the Lions. It's deep-rooted in you, and you don't have much option. You just have that patriotism, like what you said.
Right.
And even if you're moved to another state, you always have that connection to the Lions.
Sure.
And so you always have.
I think using the Lions was a
I know that we're talking about. I'm talking. Okay, so I'm not trying to say sports people are unintelligent.
It's being true to the school. I see this all the time. In fact, this is one of my problems with party politics is being true to the school. I just had this argument.
I know what
Tuesday with somebody, and that is when we become so in love with our party, we stop critically thinking about the Constitution and the very principles of how this country was brought about. And so what happens is we have a tendency then to say that anything that the other side does is bad and anything that I do is good. That becomes very dangerous. Right. And I've seen this. We've all gone to high school. We've all seen this. We've all seen the Be True to Your School, where you're sitting there watching a basketball game and your team is committing all kinds of fouls. And that's okay. But the minute one of the other team makes a small foul and the ref doesn't call it, everybody's incensed in the stands that the ref didn't call that and he must be working for the other side. Mm-hmm. So this is the problem with that idea of duty to the party, duty to an idealism instead of a duty to the principles and a duty to your neighbor.
I was trying to get an analogy, maybe someone that doesn't understand a lot of what we're saying, trying to make it easier for them. I'll make it even easier. You have a duty to be a dad if you're a father.
Yeah.
Right? Let's make it, that's pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
You have a duty to protect yourself when you're in a time of need, right?
Yeah.
So like we can make it very easy for people.
You have a duty to feed your family.
But what we're talking about here is when you're talking about duty as a citizen, you have a duty to be a good neighbor.
Yeah.
This one has gone out the door.
Oh yeah.
I don't know many neighbors that talk anymore. What happened to a block party? Mm-hmm. So like we see these neighbors fighting or bickering over silly stuff or non-silly stuff, whatever. But
that's part of direct democracy, though.
Yeah,
it really is. Yeah. It's part of direct democracy. In fact, we in Germany we saw that where if you see something, say something. Because the brown shirts wanted you to point out your neighbor, so we got neighbor to go against neighbor, so that neighbors didn't trust neighbors.
And
we've got that same thing almost going on. And I don't mean to be disingenuous to say it's like that, but it's somewhat like that, where you're supposed to, especially under the Patriot Act, point out your neighbors so that we can beast on them. No. That's not what it's supposed to be. You have a duty to be a neighbor, but you'll also have a duty to protect those others when somebody's going to do something wrong.
Go ahead, Will.
Let me say this. Some of the earliest foreign visitors to America in the early 19th century said that the thing that distinguishes Americans from us, from the societies that we come from, is that Americans get together in clubs, in schools, in all sorts of churches, all sorts of civic associations, and help each other out. This was a characteristic of a Republican form of government. This is a way of life of America.
Made us who we were.
What you're talking about, John, is a society that's becoming more and more atomized, right? It's becoming more and more separated from one another.
Well, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that because look how many I guarantee there's less memberships in elk clubs.
Yeah,
or any of that type of stuff, right?
I'm a Mason. The Masonic Lodge is way down.
Well, I mean,
in membership,
people in politics involvement is way down.
Yeah.
So like in my community, in Somerset Center, I'm a computer repairman, and I stopped actually repairing computers. I do it for free. Like all my old customers that call me now, or even new ones, particularly like an elderly woman, and she needs a keyboard, or when you're dealing with computers and dealing with the elderly, it's comical because they'll be like, my computer's broken. You get over there, it's the mouse ain't turned on.
Right. This on switch needs to be on.
So like
I resemble that remark.
Yeah. So I find myself, it's my duty at this point to help these people in the communities. Yeah. So like that's part of like for myself as a citizen, it's my duty to help these other citizens out. I wanted to talk about duty because I think it's important because we don't understand what duty is as individuals. We got simple ones like being a dad and stuff like that, but it's really your duty to be a neighbor. Like it's my duty when I disagree with you, Will, as a politician, to shake your hand at the end of the argument or debate. Right. And then go get a beer, or whatever, so like it's my duty to be civil.
Right.
And it's so easy. Like when we were at that town hall meeting the other night, John, it was instant heated argument. There was no civilness,
no civility to it at all.
And so when I told him, listen, I don't have to fight and argue.
Yeah.
Like that's not what we're here to do. I'm going to be civil. And it took about 15-20 minutes after you left for me to sit down with these guys, for them to sit down and relax, to calm down. And even if we disagree at the end of the day, I was able to shake their hands. Yeah. And that's, as an individual or as a politician, we have to have this duty minded. We have to be reminded about that duty.
Well, that's part of free speech too. And this is what kind of worries me, what's going on a lot of the liberal campuses, is this idea of,
you're right and I'm wrong.
well,
type thing?
we believe in free speech as long as it's something I agree with.
Right.
No, we should be able to completely diabolically disagree. I mean,
You meant diametrically disagree.
I'm sorry.
Diabolically.
Diametrically. I'm sorry.
How about both?
Yes.
It's a theological
Some people
point,
are
but it's an
diabolical
important
when they're
one.
diametrically opposed. It is a diabolical thing. But yes, thank you for the correction. But yes, I mean, we should be able to be the Hillsdale Justice Project. Let's look at that. Richard Wunsch and I started that. Him and I are probably the farthest on the two opposite spectrums from one another that we can be.
Right.
But we have very, very, very good knockdown, drag-out debates at the HJP meetings. Mm-hmm. And nobody's mad at one another. Nobody's threatening anybody. Nobody's using any foul language at anybody. It is just good, solid debate, and it feels good. And this is the way it's supposed to be. And this is kind of why we started this, is to kind of show people how you can disagree and still be civil.
And let me, I got one last thing, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Is I don't know if this is sort of going into conspiracy, but I watch a lot of kids' cartoons with my kids.
Yeah, that's conspiracy.
My son watches a lot of stuff that are associated with like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh. There are like these kids that play card games now, or various different. I guess you could say they're Japanese animation type cartoons.
It's mind control.
Well, what's funny is the main character in every single cartoon, and I would say there's probably a half a dozen of them that he watches. They're all victimized. They're always whining. They're always loud pitched,
Yes.
and so like it's always heated. Even when it's a moment where it doesn't need to be heated. Yeah. And so I think so I'm not saying, I'm thinking maybe just in general as a society, we're kind of growing up to, if you disagree with something, that you're instantly heated.
Was that life imitating art or art imitating life?
Well, it's life imitating progressivism.
Mm-hmm.
Getting back to that point, which John Rutan mentioned near the top of the show here, we talked about democracy and how a democracy could be tyrannical if it doesn't respect natural rights.
It never does. It never does.
And it very seldom does, which is why we have a republic, right? But the other thing is that under the progressive movement, which was in the last 120 years, it first got it into
late
academia,
right.
And then it moved out from there. Mm-hmm. What the progressives wanted to do was to have democracy on the one hand, more and more egalitarianism in elections and referendums and recalls and all that sort of stuff. But the real governance would be in the bureaucracy. Woodrow Wilson called the administrative state.
Unencumbered by the people.
Yeah, unencumbered by the people, and having all three branches of government within itself. You have administrative law passed by who? Administrators. You have administrative law courts. Staffed by who? Administrators.
Administration.
And, of course, you have executives.
Well, let me give an example of administration law so the viewers understand what we're saying. Administration law would be like IRS, right?
Yes, IRS, any of the major bureaucracies in this country today.
All your abbreviations.
Yeah,
all your acronyms is the
alphabet soup agency.
Fancy word for that.
John and I talked about the
alphabet agency.
So those came about through the progressive period.
Yes.
And they actually came about unconstitutionally.
Most of them did. Some of the things like the income tax, which fuels this massive additional state apparatus that we have, of course, was passed by constitutional amendment. But
there's also a Supreme Court ruling that says the 16th Amendment was never
this
ratified
is the great
properly.
debate, right?
Well, yeah.
This is the great debate,
let's
right?
just let's not get into the weeds.
We don't have to go all that. Yeah.
But
we'd say the streets, but you say the weeds.
Yeah,
it's okay.
So anyway, this is the administrative state. It's a bureaucracy. It pervades what it does is to get into the hearts and minds of people to make you submissive, subservient, passive, not a citizen, not an active citizen, because, hey, you can't affect this thing anyway.
Make you a subject under the government.
Well, it also takes away. It affects your natural law too. Because let me give you an example. Let me give you an example of this. I just signed my daughter up for school. Okay. And so it's Head Start. It's like a preschool, and it's in Addison School District. And so I met up with the teacher, and she's a very nice woman. She was in corrections field for quite some time, same as you, John. And and so now she's doing teaching. And she hands me these paperwork and tells me that I got to fill these. First off, I got to have a meeting there with her, with me and my wife. Then she's got to come to my house for an hour and have a meeting at the house. Well, yeah. Hold on.
It takes a society to raise a child.
So then they said, well, we got to do blood work. And I'm like, what do you mean we got to do blood work? She's like, well, we got to have a lead test done, and then we got to have hemoglobin done. And I was like, okay. And then we need dental paper. This is all before I was supposed to immunize my kid too. So I'm against immunizations, John. So I'm like, okay. The very first thing after she said all this is I looked at her. I was like, hey, Nancy, I got to be completely honest with you. I do a lot of politicking in the community. I said, and I do a little bit of research and stuff, but I go, where do you draw your line in the sand, Nancy, individually? Like, not even as your career. Where do you draw your line in the sand? Now she started stuttering a little bit. She didn't know how to respond because now she's on the record, right? So she doesn't know even how to respond as a citizen or as a teacher because she's in the school building. Mm-hmm. So she didn't know where to go. So she was kind of beating around the bush, and then she jumped into Tim. We talked about Tim Wahlberg, and she realized I didn't like Tim Wahlberg. So then she opened up, and she was like, "Oh, good," So she's talking about how she's a state record collector now. She comes into the home for an hour. She's supposed to record anything that she sees or does. She has to do this. So and we're talking about blood. I'm like, where do you draw your line in the sand? I mean, like, you want me to cut their finger off and give it to you next? So like,
she didn't have a line in the sand.
She didn't. Well, first off, I don't know if she does, but she couldn't explain it.
No, and people that can't, that's because they support the bureaucracy that supports them. I saw this in the Department of Corrections.
All this progressiveness of this regulatory law has really, really chimed into my natural rights here.
Well, you get this all the time, and this is what I said. I saw this with law enforcement. I saw this in the executive branch of government and state government. Same thing is you get people that are so ingrained into that, well, my job is necessary for me to violate your rights, so somehow it must be right because I get paid well to do it. So it must be right. So I don't even have a line in the sand because I can't see that. Then what we do is we tell the same people that are doing that they're heroes. That just because of what they're wearing, they're heroes.
You're talking about police and fire department, particularly.
Exactly. So what we do is and then I've seen the training where we do get them talking so you can get that search done on the car. Violate the rights. Supreme Court even helped when the Supreme Court said the police have the right to lie to you to get you to give your rights up. They can do that, but you can't lie to them or you'll go to jail. So we've got this idea and so we got these people that are good people. Let me say that right up front.
Of course,
they're very good people.
They're human.
Their families love them. Their church groups love them. Their kids love them. They're good people, but they're doing the state's bidding of direct democracy out of the best of intentions because they don't know the Constitution, nor do they have a line in the sand where they will draw the line.
Well, they don't know what natural law is. They don't know what any of this is. They don't know the structure of any of it.
The reason they don't know what natural law is that the progressives denied the reality of natural law.
Going back to the progressive history, yes.
What they said was that you have to ask yourself, where does right come from anyway? Mm-hmm. Well, the Declaration says it comes from the laws of nature, and nature's God. But the progressives didn't believe that. What they thought was that human history, the course of human events is progressing. It's always the general movement is onward and upward.
Yeah, like man doesn't have self-evident truth.
Exactly.
Right.
And we're going to the farther we go, the better we are. Franklin Roosevelt,
like morally better.
Franklin Roosevelt learned that from his teacher at Groton Academy, which was an elite private school that he was educated at when he was in elementary school. Mm-hmm. And that mindset means basically that as the modern state develops, the more it develops, the more legitimate it is. The more right it is.
Woodrow Wilson said that faction wasn't a problem anymore. See, faction was only a problem if you believed in natural law. Yeah. As you are educated and you better yourself, then faction isn't a problem because you would never treat your neighbor bad.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what's funny,
so
Will,
that's not
we
right.
talked about this in our first episode, because we talked about integrity, morals, and,
Right.
and whatnot. We were talking about this.
I listened to it.
Yeah.
Oh.
So like factions.
Did
like,
it sound like we knew what we were talking about?
Pretty much.
I mean,
That's I came here to make sure that
it's
you didn't go
check
too
up on
far
us.
off the
Yeah,
rails.
yeah.
Okay.
So like a lot. I mean, the average person don't know what faction is.
Yeah.
So like,
James Madison did.
Yeah.
well, there's a. Okay,
Sown
so
in the very nature of man.
let's close up duty now, and we'll go to the next topic. But before we jump on the next topic, there's a story going around in the media right now with this teacher that was speaking up about a superintendent, and she got arrested at the school. Have you guys seen that in the
Yeah,
news?
I saw that.
Okay, so I knew what happened, because when you heard the politician or the superintendent say, "Well, you're not on the agenda," so obviously she was breaking the rules of Robert's rules there, so she was in the wrong for speaking out during the wrong time.
Yeah.
Even though he was addressing her when the officer removed her. That's what I didn't understand.
Yeah, I get that. I get that there was two wrongs.
Yeah, there was some
there's
problems
probably
all the way
a
around
dozen
there.
wrongs. I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
so I seen that, and well, the average person does not know Robert rules. So I was with my neighbor last night, and he was getting a little tipsy, drinking some beers, and he was like, maybe the township should send out a letter and tell everybody how a meeting is, so when they attend, they know how to. I'm like, well, is it the government's job to teach people on these Robert rules?
Well, it is through the high schools. That's what civics classes used to be about. We realized in Hillsdale Justice Project, this is why we started it in 2012, we realized that there's a whole bunch of human beings out there that don't know how to run a meeting.
No,
they've never had to run a meeting.
It's going to be greater than 99%.
That's right. So that's one of the things that we do. We teach Robert's Rules of Order there. We've got parliamentarians that we're trying to raise up there, and everybody gets a chance at running meetings and doing public speaking. People that never would have had that opportunity other than that group. So this is a good thing. I mean, but we should have been doing it in our high schools. In fact, Toastmasters is part of that, doing that same thing. And I think Glenn Frobel and his wife are involved in that. But that's a good thing as well. That Toastmasters, that does the same thing. It gets people used to speaking in public.
A lot of
doing
those
Robert's Rules of
clubs,
Orders.
a lot of those clubs, like Elks clubs and stuff like that, they used to have stuff like that, right?
Sure.
Like,
JCCs used to be a young man's professional business group, and they taught that.
Daughters of the American Revolution.
Sure.
I wonder if like Boy Scouts does it. I'm sure they probably do too.
Yeah, Boy Scouts does.
Yeah.
They have a class in that.
Well, our next topic, Will, as a local politician, where is the line in the sand with taxation and morals? And this is a big question. I don't even know if you guys want to keep talking, and we can have a longer session if you guys want. But this is probably going to be running into our time. It's up to you. I'll leave it up to you guys.
Should we have a thing of Admiral Akbar going, it's a trick?
It's a trap.
It's a trap.
Yeah. John doesn't know nothing about Star Wars, just so the audience knows.
Yeah, okay.
He's never even seen it, I don't think.
I haven't seen it, but I have seen it.
But as a politician, as a local politician, where's your line in the sand with taxation and morals? I've been commenting on Hillsdale Hot Debates about this quite a bit, Will. I don't know if you're on Hillsdale Hot Debates to see this.
I'm not on Facebook.
Okay, so like I made a comment that all taxation is theft.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I made a comment that all taxation is
That
a form
didn't
of
go
theft.
over well, did it?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people justify theft. So, like, I'm talking morally more than I am anything at this point. So I go look up the definition of stolen, stealing, and steal, theft. I look up at these, and I can't find the word theft where it's saying it's okay for taxation.
Well, the tagline "all taxation is theft" was formulated by Murray Rothbard.
Okay.
Who was he called himself an anarcho-capitalist, which meant that basically he didn't want government to exist. He wanted everything to be a market. Right? Everything would, if we could only get rid of government, Rothbard thought, then we could have nothing but free markets in the world.
Yeah, we'd have good things.
And to me, this is a utopian view. That with respect to taxation, it's part of when you go out of the state of nature into civil society, then you've basically agreed to moderate your right of self-government to the degree that you're sharing it with others, and you're contributing monies by consent. You're contributing monies to support the law enforcement and other criminal procedures, the court system, and so on. That costs money. So you're basically getting a third party. You're no longer the judge, right, of my relations with you. We're no longer in a state of nature. We go to a third party. We do civil litigation. All of that costs money, which means that by consent, if the key thing with the founders is they never said taxation is theft. They said no taxation without representation. In other words, no taxation if I am not eligible to vote for the people who are taxing me.
Right.
That's consent. Now, that would have implications for the current tax system, wouldn't it? For example, in the state sales tax, why am I required to pay an Ohio state sales tax if I'm a Michigan citizen? I have no vote in Ohio to impose a tax.
Right.
And Ohio people don't have any vote in Michigan to impose a tax. That's taxation without representation.
Sure, but we've gotten so far away from
indeed
things.
But that's the. I mean, I'm not saying that we could ever. We're necessarily as a practical matter going to be able to go back to that. But the basic moral point about taxation should always be that you try to get as close to that as possible.
Sure.
So if you're going to have taxes, and I don't think it's theft, because it's not theft if I consent to it, right? And
but how do I consent?
No, let him finish, John, because I'm going to cap on that.
Okay.
Well, let me tell you right from the rip. Me and John disagree with you. Okay.
Not completely.
Not completely, but we disagree with you. Actually, I think we completely disagree. Probably at the foundation of it. But go ahead and I want you to finish up, and then we're going to recap. I mean, we're not going to really have a debate here, probably, but we want to tap into this.
But we should give Will the last word.
Oh, we will. We will. Will already consented that we're going to go over our show out time.
Okay.
Well, that's the key.
So we're over by consent.
I'm stealing his time.
That's the key thing: is consent.
Okay.
Is citizen consent. You're basically consenting to be taxed, and if you don't want to be part of the civil society, it would be tyrannical if you couldn't get out. For example, in the Soviet Union, you were not allowed to emigrate out of the Soviet Union.
Oh, you mean you wouldn't be allowed to leave the community or the state or the country, for that matter?
Whereas in the United States, you can get out of town, and
only if you're financially able to.
Yeah.
Well. Like I said, John and I disagree with you.
I know.
God bless that utopia. Because there's certain taxations, and I could be wrong here, but like we're talking about, we're talking small stuff right now. Let's just talk about like city services, local stuff, because that's where me and John do our biggest fights.
Yeah, we don't look at national.
We don't do national. We don't even do a lot of state stuff.
We believe local government has way more power than anybody else anyway.
So like, let's just take something simple like a local community park. Okay, we'll start with that because that's a softer topic than like say emergency services. That's a real hot topic for everybody.
Yeah, that hurts a lot of people's feelings.
So like, why can't a local park be a pay to play? Like, why can't I pay for the play on a local park?
That you could do that. It would, but if you're talking about that's not a basic natural right, right? It's the basic natural rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. So the governmental structures that are designed to be funded by taxes should be concentrated on those rights. That's why, for example, in the Constitution, the government only has specific enumerated powers beyond which it's not supposed to go. So
that was the limit.
That's the limit that we were talking about earlier, is what you're saying.
And so in a local government, if the local government is doing something that is providing for your security. It's affecting your safety and happiness, in other words, and that means affecting means securing it, not just affecting it or influencing it, but really securing it. Then your obligation as a citizen is to support the government, and you can argue back and forth about what the taxes should be all that stuff.
We would probably come to a disagreement because I think you would have a hard time proving how you secure that. Well, I have a Second Amendment right, for an example, and
the way you prove it is to there's an easy way of proving it.
Okay,
and the way you prove it is to look at societies where government has broken down. The reason Rothbard was wrong, the guy who said taxation is theft.
Mm-hmm.
The reason he's wrong about if you get rid of government, you're just going to have peaceful free markets, which would be very nice. The reason that's wrong is if you look around the world where governments actually do really break down, what you find is not peaceful free markets developing. What you find is gangs of tough,
Anarchy.
young
You're talking about
men
anarchy.
Survival of the
who are
fittest.
armed, who then make their own government and hold everybody hostage to them. That's true in the Middle East. We see that in
you
the
see
Middle
it in
East,
Central America.
in Africa, and in parts of Mexico where
Yeah.
some of the
Yeah.
government has failed.
Many parts of Central America.
and many parts of Central America.
And South America.
So this is why in other words, typically the folks who make these anarcho-capitalist type arguments are thinking of it strictly in terms of economics, whereas there are other dimensions of human life than economics.
When I say taxation is a form of theft, I'm not coming from an anarchy standpoint. I think that's where we're kind of getting a hinge here. I'm talking about morally. Thou shalt not steal, right?
Right.
So, like, it doesn't take a religious person. It doesn't take a pastor or a spiritual person to understand what thou shalt not steal means. So when I go look at the definition of stolen, stealing, theft, if I look up these definitions, and I don't want to pay for a community park, it's stolen from me. I don't care what consent I gave to my local government. I don't give them the consent to steal that money from me.
Here's the thing: it's a little bit more complicated than that, because if every person was enabled to consent to every item of government,
we have computers now.
It would undermine the government, because I would do a rational choice calculation and say, hey, I'm going to be a parasite for the rest of my life. I'm going to let Rutan. He's got this. He's got all that money here.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree on how hard it would be.
So consent. What I'm saying is that consent is not just an individual thing. It's also a consent to join a civil society with a government, and that in order to maintain that, you've got to do things like the political process, which is voting, standing up for your rights, all the different things that you're trying to teach folks.
All the
duties.
The duties. Those duties. The basic duties we're talking about. Yeah.
Civic associations, which we are losing, and that's why because we live in a bureaucratic environment.
Well, it wasn't that long ago when our wealth wasn't extracted the way that it's extracted today.
Oh, that's for sure.
Okay,
yeah,
that's for sure.
Not that long ago.
Yeah, it was
1909.
No argument with me there.
Yeah, 1909.
So,
but why is that? It's because you have this massive bureaucratic apparatus that
started right about the same time
to basically process your money and give it back to you the way it wants to do it.
Well, that's because Article 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution set up the very size and scope of the federal government. And that's what it was supposed to be. So all these people that go, oh, well, this president doubled the size of government. How? What they did was they created bureaucracies.
Yeah.
So they didn't really double the size of government. They doubled the size of the bureaucratic state that is stealing from us, because government is still set by Article 1, 2, and 3, because by Article 5, I don't think that any of those three have been changed.
No. It's what you have is a kind of shadow government that is effectively outside of a large degree of constitutional
And sometimes
control.
that's called the deep state.
Yeah,
today.
It's not all that deep, though. I mean, it's everywhere. What's so deep about it?
Yeah, it's true.
We don't have to digress all the way there.
No.
So we're talking locally here. So, like, I know the thought pattern. If I put in there, it's easy for you to say, well, I say taxation theft, and you're saying I say that you could pay to play. You're like, no, you can't, because it's too hard.
Now, I'm not saying you can't play to pay. But first of all, we better be very careful about this.
I'm not saying will.
The term pay to play is usually used in politics to mean if you're bidding on a government contract, you have to put up $1,000 just to get into the game.
Bribery.
That's not what you mean.
Yeah, I'm talking.
You're talking about saying you should charge admissions to support public parks and not tax for them.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, is there any justification for stealing?
That would mean, if let's define what stealing is.
Stealing is taking something that I taken from me that I don't consent to.
Right, and the consent part is the key thing here.
Because we have a form of government doesn't mean
it's
that's
not
consent.
it's not just picking and choosing anything you want in government. It's not like a government isn't like a I don't want to say smorgasbord, but a buffet where you go and graze on the things you want to graze on.
But you say it can't.
You're in a civic association, which means that, if I join a church or if I join an Elks Lodge, I have to abide by the rules of that church or Elks Lodge unless I want to go through the procedures of trying to reform it, or I can leave. But I can't just say, well, I'm going to obey that rule of the Elks Lodge or that rule of the church. And by the way, that silly rule about theft, right, that the Christian church frowns upon. Well, I'm not going to do that one. I'd rather pick somebody's pocket while I'm sitting in the pew. You can't do that. You can't pick and choose. If your consent has come in when you went through the door.
Well, where's your limit then?
Your limit is...
No, not mine. Where's your limit as a politician?
Right. Well, as my limit it's not a politician, it's as a citizen.
No,
right?
but
as a human
but
being,
the politician can take as much as they want.
Here you go. The right of the citizen is exactly the right as the argument of the Declaration of Independence. If by a long train of abuses and usurpations, a design, we've discovered a design to tyrannize over us, then we have the right to revolution.
Okay.
This was the same argument that wasn't made proper during the Civil War. Yeah. There's some arguments there. So they didn't do the same things. They didn't use that long-term abuses and do the same thing that we did, or that the founders did when they separated from England. But however, I'm a big one for natural law and not that the Constitution is Newtonian, not Darwinian.
Right.
I'm huge on that.
Which nobody knows what that means, but go ahead.
That's all right. We do. And this is where I'm having the discussion. So my thing is, I understand consent. However, too many times we're into this, you have to admit, we're into a democracy. We're more so than ever.
I'll tell you what I admit. I admit that we're into a what is effectively an oligarchy.
Well, that's
which means the government of the few in an unjust way.
Well, we say that too.
My whole thing is a democracy is a transitional government between a republic and an oligarchy.
Yeah.
I would like to hope that we haven't gotten to an oligarchy yet.
Oh well, no. We've got what we have is what
you're hurting me now.
What we're talking about is a kind of mixed form of government, right? You've got this oligarchic, bureaucratic state on the one hand, and you've got a republic.
Yeah, it's
on
kind
the
of
other.
a smear through that whole spectrum.
But the republic is democratized to some degree, not entirely. I mean, we still have the Supreme Court. U.S. senators have a fair amount of sway.
I don't know.
Right?
I don't know.
This is all the influence from the progressive period that has shifted us to this.
Sure. But my thing is, when we start looking at that, and we have become so mired in that progressive ideology of direct democracy, and we've got so much of that now,